Change leaders harness existing dissatisfaction, leadership learning. On November 7, 1917, the Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace in Petrograd, igniting the Russian Revolution. The storming of the Winter Palace marked the culmination of months of growing discontent and revolutionary fervor that had been building since the February Revolution. It had already toppled the Romanov dynasty and ended centuries of imperial rule. In its place, the provisional government, led by Alexander Kerensky, assumed power but failed to earn the trust of the population, especially as it continued Russia's deeply unpopular war against Germany. Petrograd, later renamed Leningrad and now known as St. Petersburg, was a city in turmoil, symbolizing both imperial decline and revolutionary energy. The Winter Palace, an opulent Baroque structure that had served as the official residence of Russian czars, stood as the ultimate symbol of imperial power and authority. By October 1917, following the Julian calendar then in use in Russia, the palace housed the increasingly isolated provisional government. Vladimir Lenin and the Bolshevik Party, having returned from exile and steadily gained support through promises of peace, land, and bread, recognized that the moment for decisive action had arrived. The actual assault on the Winter Palace began in the evening and continued into the early morning hours. Contrary to popular dramatizations, the takeover involved relatively little bloodshed. Revolutionary forces, including Red Guards, soldiers, and sailors from the Kronstadt naval base, gradually surrounded the palace. The cruiser Aurora, anchored on the Neva River, fired blank shots to signal the beginning of the assault, though this symbolic gesture has often been mythologized in subsequent retellings. Inside the palace, the provisional government's ministers found themselves virtually defenseless. Most military units had either defected to the Bolsheviks or remained neutral. The women's battalion and a small number of military cadets provided token resistance, but the outcome was never in doubt. By the early morning of November 8th, the ministers were arrested and Bolshevik forces controlled the building. Kerensky had already fled the city in a desperate attempt to rally loyal troops. The fall of the Winter Palace represented far more than a change in government. It signaled the end of centuries of imperial rule and the beginning of the world's first socialist state. The Bolsheviks moved swiftly to consolidate power, withdrawing Russia from the war, redistributing land to peasants, and nationalizing industry. These actions set in motion a cascade of consequences that would reshape global politics throughout the 20th century. The revolution's impact extended well beyond Russia's borders. It inspired socialist and communist movements worldwide, contributed to the ideological divisions that characterized the Cold War, and fundamentally altered how people conceived of political and economic organization. These events demonstrated how quickly established institutions could crumble when they lost legitimacy and connection with the populations they governed. The storming of the Winter Palace reveals profound truths about systemic transformation. When institutional structures lose their foundation of support and legitimacy, even the most imposing edifices of power become vulnerable. The provisional government's failure stemmed not from lack of resources or formal authority, but from its inability to address the fundamental concerns of those it sought to govern. The revolution succeeded because it channeled widespread dissatisfaction into coordinated action at precisely the moment when existing structures were most fragile. Change leadership lessons. These historical events provide profound insights for today's change leaders who face similar challenges of legitimacy, timing, and transformation. Leaders of change recognize that organizations collapse when formal authority becomes disconnected from the legitimacy required to maintain stakeholder confidence and support. They must recognize fleeting opportunity windows and act decisively rather than delaying for conditions that may never improve. Change leaders understand that simple, tangible messaging addressing immediate concerns generates broader support than complex explanations or theoretical frameworks ever achieve. They deploy strategic symbolic actions to shift collective perception, making transformation feel inevitable and building confidence that accelerates adoption throughout organizations. Leaders of change ensure transformation addresses all critical elements simultaneously to prevent partial implementation that enables resistance to reverse progress already made. Summary leadership quote: change leaders succeed when they channel existing dissatisfaction into coordinated action at precisely the moment when outdated structures lose their legitimacy and new possibilities emerge. Application: change leadership responsibility 1. Articulate a change vision. The storming of the Winter Palace illustrates that effective change leadership begins by channeling dissatisfaction into a clear and compelling vision that unites and motivates stakeholders. The Bolsheviks' simple yet powerful message during the October Revolution of peace, land, and bread resonated deeply because it addressed the population's immediate needs and frustrations, transforming discontent into purposeful collective action. In contrast, the provisional government's inability to articulate a coherent and relatable vision led to the erosion of its legitimacy and authority. Change leaders must recognize that when dissatisfaction is widespread, silence or ambiguity invites disengagement and resistance. Leaders of change must clearly articulate a vision that acknowledges current realities while offering tangible improvement, thereby transforming frustration into belief and momentum. Great change leaders convert disillusionment into shared aspiration for a better future, guiding transformation with clarity, purpose, and emotional resonance. Leadership of change final thoughts. Today's leaders face similar challenges of legitimacy and timing, amplified by technological disruption and AI-driven transformation that can rapidly erode outdated structures. Change leaders who recognize and channel existing dissatisfaction into clear, coordinated action will drive meaningful change, whilst those who ignore disconnection will watch their authority collapse. Leadership effectiveness now depends on sensing these shifts early and acting decisively before windows of opportunity close. Find out more. Change Management Leadership, Leadership of Change, Volume 4,